Hi, I'm Taylor Owen. From the Globe and Mail, this is Machines Like Us. So I want to pose what might seem like an obvious question. Should we be trying to build artificial intelligence that's as smart or smarter than a human being? Not can we or will we, the answer to both of which seems increasingly yes. But should we? In other words, is the development of AI a moral pursuit? If I were to ask Sam Altman this, he'd probably look at me like I was crazy. Many of the people working on AI believe it will eradicate diseases, reverse climate change, and lead to unimaginable prosperity. But the risks have also become all too clear. Millions of people will probably lose their jobs. Foreign adversaries will gain the ability to create new, deadly pathogens. And many of the world's leading AI experts seem to think there's a non-zero chance it could wipe out our species. So again, should we really be doing this? There are plenty of computer scientists with opinions on this, but I wanted to talk to Rutger Bregman about it. Bregman isn't a technologist or even a scientist. He's a historian who just wrote a book called Moral Ambition. The book is a rallying cry to get readers to become, well, morally ambitious. But what exactly does that mean? And if you're building a technology that could either save the world or destroy it, where do you fit into that? Part of the answer may lie in Bregman's first book, Utopia for Realists. He wrote it more than a decade ago, and it doesn't even contain the phrase artificial intelligence. But it describes a world that in the age of AI now seems increasingly possible. A world with universal basic income, 15-hour work weeks, and massive wealth redistribution. So I think the question of whether the development of AI is moral or not may well hinge on the ability to turn that dream into a reality. Rutger, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. We've got a lot to talk about.
I set out a narrow focus for this conversation.
This is going to be a 24-hour marathon interview, right?
Well, I hear that's what the cool podcasts do.
Okay.
So let's start with this. Your latest book is called Moral Ambition. Mm-hmm. I have a pretty good idea, I think, what ambition is and looks like. But how do you define morality?
Oh, that's a good question. Look, I'm not an ethicist. I'm not a moral philosopher. So I really see myself as a pluralist. I'm not someone who fully buys into one ethical theory. I'm not the kind of utilitarian who says, hey, let's come up with the ultimate number, the ultimate way to maximize utility in the universe. I do appreciate what utilitarianism has brought us, though. I think it's important to learn how to count. If you help one person, that's great. If you help two people, that's twice as much. And this is called mathematics. Then on the other side, life is about many things. It's about, yes, certainly morality, but it's also about aesthetics. It's about, parenthood. It's about having fun and drinking beer. As I said, I'm a pluralist. I'm interested in living a rich, well-rounded life. I believe in humanity, unlike some of my friends, I guess, in Silicon Valley, who are like, well, humanity is a thing that needs to be replaced by something better. I'm rooting for our species. I think there's really something beautiful there. And I would love to live a world where we can all explore fully what it means to be human. There's this line somewhere in the oeuvre of Karl Marx where he said, look, socialism will not solve the problems of life. It cannot. Of course it cannot. It will just help people to make sure that they can actually face those problems, and not get distracted by all kinds of other problems like poverty and inequality and oppression and you name it. I'm not saying that Marx's vision of socialism, that is the future, but I like that frame, that we should get to a place where we can all at least try and live a fulfilling life.
Can AI expand our moral circle, from your view? Is that possible?
Well, some even wonder whether AI at some point should be included in our moral circle. The biggest question here, obviously, is what sentience is, right? Take an old debate over abortion that is particularly controversial in the United States. I mean, this is, in essence, a debate about what constitutes a person. And that's a really, really hard question. I tend to have a more consequentialist attitude here, where I'm like, look, you need to have some matter of consciousness, right? And so I tend to say like, well, just after conception, I wouldn't, consider that as a person with a lot of rights. But I can see the arguments, on the other side, because then the question is like, okay, but when then? Like after 5 hours, after 2 days, after a week, after 10 weeks, right? It's not easy. Like clearly it's emergent. And maybe we should think about it that way with AI as well. Like, when does a machine become sentient? To me, these are just baffling questions. Like, we have absolutely no idea. But indeed, there are some people who argue that at some point we may be forced to conclude that, hey, there is something here, right? Maybe we should recognize certain rights. And I think we should be open to that question, because the most common moral mistake we have made throughout history is not giving people, the recognition that they are actually agents, persons, moral agents, that they deserve to be recognized.
It feels like this might be the first technology that we've anthropomorphized to the degree we have, and that we have really said is like akin to something intrinsically human. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you think that's a mistake. There is a debate about this, right? Should we think of these as like the mind or like human? Mm-hmm. Or should we just think of them as any old technology? And which one leads to a better moral framework from your perspective?
I find that an extremely hard question to answer, because we really do not understand the technology, right? And that's very often the case throughout history, that people first develop a technology, start using it, but only decades later really start understanding what they're doing, right? It just starts with people in a garage or a lab or whatever, seeing what works. And only afterwards, we try and understand it. Look, I think it's really important to say this, that I am not a technological determinist. I think it's incredibly important that in this moment, we recognize that we make choices. We have agency. The path of technology is not laid out before us. There are many, many instances in the history of our species where, we made certain choices on like which technologies, for example, we wanted to accelerate. In my book, I write extensively about the invention of the birth control pill, which was really a project of one super morally ambitious suffragette called Catherine McCormick, who was like, this is what we need. This is how we're going to get that second feminist revolution. And she made it happen. But there are also technologies where we can just make the decision to say no. Like I live in Europe. We've said no to GMO in Europe. Don't think that's the right decision, actually, but it's possible. I can't eat my favorite plant-based burger, the Impossible Burger here, because we said no. Maybe a better example is human cloning, right? This has been possible for quite some time, since the 90s, but there is like a global moratorium, a global taboo on this. So I think that is extremely important, that we do not go along with the Silicon Valley narrative that says, this is happening anyway. If we don't do it, then China does it. Like, we have no agency whatsoever. Just jump on the roller coaster and enjoy the ride. This is it.
I think that's such a critical point. I mean, we particularly with something as big and with as much momentum and capital behind it, it can feel like we don't have agency in that, and that this choice is being made for us and this thing's being built. The fact that it will be built is predetermined, but I think whether and even how it's built is a function.
I want to strongly push back against that, actually. I don't think it's determined at all that it will be built. So I spent a lot of time studying the movements of the 19th century, particularly abolitionism and the suffragette movement. I wanted to find inspiration, from the great moral pioneers of the past. Now, one thing that really struck me is that both of these movements were intertwined with one other movement that we have forgotten about today. And this was the temperance movement. This was a movement mainly led by women who were fighting the alcohol industry. They were saying like, hey, this alcohol industry is addicting our husbands. Then they come home after they've, spent all our money, and then they kick us to shit, and we want the alcohol industry banned. And eventually, as you know, this led to prohibition in the US. I think that was a step too far. But I think what we see today is the beginning of what I like to call a neo-temperance movement. Obviously, social media and the internet, that's the alcohol of today, right? So many people are addicted. So many people's brains are being messed up. And you can already see it happening with a movement like the one that Jonathan Haidt, the great American psychologist, has founded against phones in schools. But I think that is just the beginning, that people are waking up and realizing, hey, we have actual agency here. And what I predict is that there is going to be a mass movement, actually, against social media, against the development of AI. I recently looked into a poll that was done in multiple countries across the world. And it turns out that actually these developments in AI are extremely unpopular. People are very nervous about it. They really don't like what's going on. It's just that latent dissatisfaction has not been mobilized yet. But just like Jonathan Haidt with smartphones in schools, I think smart political entrepreneurs could mobilize that and could turn it into a bipartisan coalition. And then 5 years from now, things may look very differently, and we may have a powerful neo-temperance movement that, will make the people in Silicon Valley lose a lot of money.
We could, and I agree. There's a tremendous amount of friction in democratic societies of whether citizens want to use a technology they're being told could upend their lives and lead to their job loss and potentially the extinction of their species. Like, I think it's perfectly understandable that people would have a bit of friction in like their full adoption of that technology. But a lot of it depends, I think, on, to frame it in moral terms again, I mean, whether the outcomes of this are going to be positive for society or not.
Exactly.
The people building it are framing it in positive terms, right? Like, these technologies could cure cancer. They could figure out a solution to climate change. Like, there's all sorts of potential hopeful and like potentially revolutionary in some ways outcomes of this technology, given the way the power of it is shaped. And so I think, how do we judge those claims, do you think? The moral claims being made by Altman and Musk?
Yeah. Okay, a couple of things. First, there's the empirical question. Is it actually true? I think the honest answer here is we don't know. But like we should be really impressed by, the progress that has been made over, say, the last 5 years. Like, if you're still one of those people who's like, hey, a ChatGPT, that's just like crypto or NFTs, then sorry, you've really not been paying attention. Like, I'm a writer. I am in awe of what the machine can do right now. I didn't think, like 5 years ago, I didn't think that would happen during my lifetime. Like, the quality of the writing, if you know how to write the good prompts, it is just an incredible assistant. And very often I'm baffled, by the quality of the feedback and the answers that I get.
I agree. Anyone who says it's not equivalent to the vast majority of human writing is just not using it.
Yeah, exactly. Then you just don't know how to use it. So that's one thing. But we don't know. We really don't know, like, if we've hit a ceiling or we'll maybe break through it. My attitude as a historian is that it doesn't really matter whether, like, AGI, whether that will happen in 2027 or 2030, or 2050. I'm not really interested in that. The question is it actually going to happen? And then what will that mean? I honestly also think that even the technology we have right now, even if we would make absolutely no more progress. I mean, it's just like electricity being invented in the late 19th century. It took like 3 decades before organizations really started using it to maximum benefit. So it really takes a lot of time for new technologies to trickle through.
But there's a moral clarity in that sense, and that, like, the people who developed electricity that was clearly a moral pursuit.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
In the sense that the outcome was a vast net positive for society.
Yeah.
Do you think AI is too? Like, we're looking at AI now. Like, is building AI moral?
I would say the jury is still out. But for all these technologies, including electricity, including the whole industrial revolution, like, we don't know yet. We don't know how the story of humanity is going to end. Like, the shape of human history is extremely weird. So let's zoom out for a bit. We humans, we come along, 300,000 years ago. We're hunter-gatherers. During this period, we are a pretty cooperative, some would even say quite friendly species. So anthropologists call this survival of the friendliest. For millennia, it's actually the friendliest among us who have the most kids and have the biggest chance of passing on their genes because they're the best at cooperating, and cooperation is crucial for survival. Then something extraordinary happens, which is people settle down and they invent agriculture. That's a long process. It takes a few thousand years, and people sometimes go back to hunter gathering. So it's not like this one straight thing. That's never in history. Like if you're in school, then people say like, and then in this year the wheel was invented. It doesn't work like that. People invent things, they forget things. It's a much more gradual process. But the agricultural revolution, as historians call it, was this incredible transformation that was very bad news for the vast majority of us. Jared Diamond, the great social geographer, calls it the worst mistake in all of human history. Like human welfare massively plummeted. Life became terrible. They entered this state of feudalism, and 95% of people, just work their ass off all the time for some princes and princesses who didn't do much. And again, health was a disaster. Like the age of pandemics was born. We domesticated animals, and that got us so many microbes that, caused so much havoc. So that was basically history for, say, the next 10, 12,000 years. Then, boom, another massive change, the Industrial Revolution. Initially, that's also pretty bad news. I mean, just read descriptions of the UK in the 19th century, cities like London or Manchester, like life expectancy plummeted even further to, 20, 30 years. People had to work so hard in the most horrific circumstances. But then in the late 19th century, for the first time, human welfare standards really start to go up and up and up and up and up. And especially after the Second World War, this insane thing starts happening when millions, tens of millions, at some point, even billions of people start living like the kings and queens of the past. And that is the era that we're living in right now. But it's just a blip, If you would take the whole of human history and look at it like a calendar, right? From January the 1st to December 31, then the period we're living in right now, I mean, that is December 31, 10 minutes before midnight. And now the next transformation seems to be coming along with AI. So whenever people say like, hey, this has been good, this has been bad, I'm like, shut up, we're in the middle of the movie. Like, we don't know how the movie's going to end.
All right, so we don't know quite how electricity's played out yet, right? But I find your writing and your work overwhelmingly optimistic and hopeful in a sense. But that view of history, I find paralyzingly pessimistic in the sense that it can lead to a paralysis as we're deciding what to put our attention and our time to, which is what you're urging us to think carefully about, right? So if I say, who knows how AI is going to turn out, that ignores potentially a whole host of normative decisions about should we be building it right now? How should we be building it? Should we be governing it? Should we be banning it? Right? There's a ton of different like moral pursuits I could engage in that are based on an immediate determination of outcome and morality, right? Not one 5,000 years from now or 3,000 years from now or 100 years from now, but now, right?
But look, you don't need to have a PhD in ethics to understand that if you have the possibility to develop an extraordinarily powerful technology, perhaps the most powerful technology in the history of civilization, and you don't know how it works. You don't know, you really don't understand it. In a way, you're not inventing it, but you're summoning it. I think that's a super important distinction. Then, is it smart to do that in, a commercial rat race where you have like incredibly well-funded commercial labs racing against each other, who have clear incentives, commercial incentives, pressure from shareholders, then also a geopolitical dynamic like, oh, we got to beat China, blah, blah, blah. And then removing all the guardrails. Like, what could possibly go wrong? Again, you don't need a PhD in ethics to understand that is probably not the best way to do it, right? I'm not saying
is
you
it
need to go
immoral?
all the way to the European precautionary principle and never invent anything because you're so afraid of it. Like in Europe, we proudly announced our AI Act to the world. And we're like, oh, we're the first ones to regulate AI. Yeah, but we have no AI companies to speak of. So it's kind of looks pathetic. But surely there's a middle ground here. And I am quite worried about the current situation because I don't think we know what we're doing. I don't think anyone can predict when this super powerful technology will arrive. I don't think whether anyone knows that AI alignment, as they call it, is possible. I mean, job loss, for example, that's the least of my worries. Absolutely the least of my worries. I think that would actually be great because like the rate of automation has slowed down quite a bit in the last 30, 40 years. And I think it should speed up. Just like in 1800, 90% of people worked in agriculture. Today, that's 2%. And I think that's great news, right? We got to let the machines do all the work for us so that we can find out what life is actually about, as Karl Marx told us. So job loss is not really what I'm worried about. It's much more like this insane concentration of power in the hands of a few individuals or a few machines. That sounds pretty terrifying to me.
Again, part of what you're asking for is like individuals to make this determination of what's the best use of their time and effort and lives and careers. And I wonder, when you look at this space and this technology, what do you think is the most moral imperative here? Or like because from that answer, I could see a bunch of ones. One would be joining AI and open AI and trying to make it better. Another might be developing policies to slow it down, right? Like, what does a moral framework tell us about how to think about how we should engage with this technology?
Okay, so for me, it's pretty simple right now. You know this guy, Eliezer Yudkowsky, probably, right? Who just published this book, If Anyone Builds It, Then Everyone Dies. I mean, that's the most pessimistic.
It's not an optimistic view.
Yeah. I love the title, as an author, I love the title. Like, he was one of the first people who, like 2 decades ago already started saying, like, this is possible. Like, and it's just been incredibly prophetic in that sense. He's been a major influence on people like Sam Altman, for example, who, read his works and were like, okay, yeah, maybe this is possible. We should pursue it. Now, obviously, people like Eliezer are like, shit, what did we do, right? For a long time, they believed in the dream of AI alignment, right? If only we would recruit a lot of very smart nerds, they can think about this problem. I think a lot of those people have now given up on the dream of AI alignment. They're now more in the situation where it's like, this quote from William F. Buckley, the U.S. conservative, that what it means to being conservative is to stand athwart history yelling, stop. That's what some of these people are doing right now. And I kind of like it, actually. I kind of like it because I think the public should be involved right now. I think that is really what should be happening right now. It should get out of this, out of the boardrooms of Silicon Valley. Should not be a techno-feudal conspiracy anymore. Like, we got to bring the people in. And yeah, when I look at the initial polling, the people, aren't very enthusiastic, actually. They're like, hey, slow down. That is what I think is one of the most obvious things, right, to do right now, is to just start making a lot of noise around this issue. Again, there's a lot of latent energy that could be mobilized here.
I agree. And I think ultimately that's a political project in a sense. And I think the politics of this get very often pushed aside for the inevitability of the technology or the markets.
Yeah. If I can add one thing. So in my book, Moral Ambition, I spent a lot of time studying the abolitionists. And initially, being a Dutch guy, I was like, yeah, I'm going to write about the Dutch abolitionists because surely they were awesome. Turns out, that would have been a very short book. I couldn't even have written a chapter about it because there was hardly any abolitionism in the Netherlands at the time. Then I looked at France and discovered, there's pretty much nothing there either. It was a bunch of writers and intellectuals who got nothing done. In Spain, the same story. In Portugal, the main work about abolitionism there is called The Sounds of Silence. I think that says a lot. Then in the US, obviously it took a civil war. And before that, abolitionism was extremely unpopular, right? It was worse than being a vegan today. And it was only in the UK that abolitionism really took off. And as I studied that movement, I was struck by how contingent it was. It was really a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens, as the famous saying from Margaret Mead goes, right? It's a small group of committed citizens that made a massive difference. Like the British Society for the Abolition of the Slave Trade, it was 12 founders in 1787. They came together saying, hey, this is the greatest moral atrocity of our time. Let's build a massive movement against it, right? And it took 2 generations to make it happen. Like only one of the founders was still alive when slavery was finally abolished throughout the British Empire. But that's what it took. And this is important. The UK forced 80% of other countries to stop slave trading. So the British movement was just absolutely essential. And I think we're now at that point in our human history as well, where things are just so flexible, right? Do not surrender yourself to like the big laws of history or technology, but recognize your own agency.
Where do you see the resistance to AI right now? Do you see people emerging or movements emerging, at least that are nascent?
So I see it here and there, actually. So I think there's a lot of awareness in communities of nerds. You're probably familiar with the effective altruism movement that has really been taken over, basically, by the concern for the rise of AI. But these people, they're very, very smart. They're often very altruistic as well. I'm quite often quite impressed by them, but they're not really good at politics or PR. They had some, you've probably seen the Sam Bankman-Fried disaster.
You were underwhelmed with them in your book.
Look, if it really turns out to be the case that we'll have AGI very soon and it will have disastrous effects, then, this is like the worst Greek tragedy, because the irony is that these effective altruists have done a lot to accelerate the ascent of AI. Like they've talked about it so much. And they're often in the same circles, and they're there in Silicon Valley having lunch with the very people who build the technology. And I don't know, I've always found that rather bizarre. It's like, if you really believe that this technology is going to kill us all, then why do you have lunch with the people who make it, right? Why would you have lunch with Adolf? If you set up a war room somewhere else and you do everything to take them down.
Their narrative of the all-powerful AI is one of the things that incentivized its building, because it created a place where capital saw potential. And it led to some of the hype ultimately.
I think that's true. And it just underscores the point that these people are very smart. And I really like a lot of these people in the movement, but they're politically extremely naive. So maybe that's what I think should happen now, is that we bring in the people who are, who don't deeply understand the technology, who are not like math whiz or anything, but who do actually understand how politics works, how media works. I think that's quite important right now.
Let's pivot to that a bit then, to the politics of this. Because you said you weren't concerned about job loss earlier. But I do think when citizens look at this technology and they're being told that this, by the CEO of Anthropic, saying that he thinks this could lead to the loss of half of all entry-level white-collar jobs, right? Like someone building the technology knows it intimately, thinks half of all jobs could go away.
Yeah.
One potential alternative political reality is one you've been working and talking about for a decade, which is universal basic income. So is it time for this? Like, is AI actually the catalyst for something you've been calling for a decade?
So there's a lot to say about this. One, beware the hype, right? I think Amodai is a particularly striking case of that. I think half a year ago, he said something like, we don't need coders anymore. Well, we'll still need them. Like, track the predictions, especially the CEOs of these AI companies. We should be wary of taking their words at face value, because they're speaking to their shareholders at the same time, right? So that's one thing.
Although some of these tech companies are laying off lots of people, right, too. So like,
sure,
some of it's already happening.
That is true. But it's... and as I said, I don't care all that much whether it's like 2029 or 2031. There was a movement in the UK in the early 19th century that was called the movement of the Luddites. And these were literally workers who would go around the country smashing the machines, because they were saying like, look, this is just wrecking our livelihoods. We've spent so much time learning a certain craft, and then a machine comes along, and what do? Do we learn a new craft? But then by the time we've learned that, there's another machine. And you know what? The Luddites were often made fun of, right? Often when someone is against the technology right now, they're like, oh, don't be such a Luddite. You're being described as some kind of stupid barbarian or something.
I've been called one before.
Well, there you go. But I think the Luddites were absolutely correct. You could say like, oh, well, in the long run, everyone benefited. Like in the late 19th and the early 20th century, wages started going up. But by then, the Luddites were long dead. So it was perfectly rational for the Luddites to revolt. And if it's true that this transition could even happen faster than, the automation in the early 19th century, then it's time for some neo-Luddites, right? I think that's definitely a voice that we need to have in a debate, or people at the table. So that's one thing. But zooming out, I think in general, automation has been a very positive thing for humanity, right? As we move from farms to factories, and from factories into the offices, and as the short work week started shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, I think the quality of our life improved immensely. And indeed, in my first book, Utopia for Realists, I argued that we should keep pushing that. I talked about the famous essay from John Maynard Keynes, who predicted that in 1930, actually, that in 2030, just 5 years from now, we would have a 15-hour work week. And that was just a simple extrapolation of the trends that he was seeing at the time. Now, that worked out just fine up until the 60s and the 70s. Like in the 60s and the 70s, a lot of experts, sociologists, economists were saying, look, the greatest challenge of the future is going to be boredom. If technology keeps accelerating like this, then indeed, we're going to have to find out what it means to live a good life when we don't have to work anymore. But then in the 70s and the 80s, neoliberalism took over, economic growth slowed down, innovation slowed down, and we started to come up with an enormous amount of BS jobs. The best minds of my generation started making people click ads, as the famous saying goes, from someone who ended up at Facebook. And in Utopia for Realists, I basically said, look, we should go back to that old idea. Like, this is the purpose of progress. This is the purpose of capitalism, is that we automate as many jobs as we can, so that, we'll see what life is after that. That is just going to be the most exciting humanistic project ever, when we don't have to work for a living anymore. At some point, we will look back, on the people in the past who will say like, oh, that's such a bizarre, outdated ideology. This idea that you're only a good person, a worthy person, if you have a job. Like, what the hell is a job even?
And you've said that in the past, and like you said there, like past moments of economic growth and technological progress, when those things come together, can either yield more time or more consumption.
Yeah.
And we've sort of time and time again chosen the latter there ultimately. But do you have any sense of which you think AI will yield?
It could be both. I've always said that we should never underestimate capitalism's extraordinary ability to come up with new socially meaningless jobs. So currently, around 25% of people in the modern workforce in rich countries think that their own job is socially meaningless. These are people who often have really nice resumes, who went to fancy universities, but still at the end of the day, they think that their own job doesn't add anything of value. They could go on strike and no one would care. Marketeers, a lot of bankers, corporate lawyers, managers. And again, it's not me saying it, it's people saying it about their own jobs. Now, this whole phenomenon can only exist because of technology, right? 25% of people who do get a lot of the resources earn a lot of money, but don't add anything of value. Again, according to themselves, not me saying it. I think that number could go up. I could even imagine some kind of bizarre dystopian society where everyone has a BS job. Like, we cling on to this ideology that you have to work for a living, and we all end up in, cubicles where we all are pretending to work. That in that scenario, we haven't updated our social technology in line with our physical technologies, right?
How is UBI a alternative path? And how would that function in your view?
So the idea is pretty simple, as you know. It's just giving everyone a monthly grant that's enough to pay for your basic needs, food, shelter, education, basically a floor in the income distribution. Absolutely unconditional and universal. Everyone gets it. There are different reasons to be excited about it. Some people see it as a super effective, non-bureaucratic tool to fight poverty, like a more efficient version of the welfare state, not have these bureaucratic and sometimes degrading forms of mean testing anymore. But there's also a more utopian side to universal basic income. But maybe, by the way, we should then talk about universal basic wealth instead of universal basic income. This starts with a simple recognition. Like, it starts with the question, where does wealth actually come from? I think it's pretty clear that if you would dump Jeff Bezos on an island or Elon Musk on an island, and an uninhabited island, like, they wouldn't survive for long. I wouldn't survive for long. I'm not sure about you, but like most of us, like, we are fundamentally dependent on others. Like, wealth is a fundamentally social product, right? We humans, we collaborate on a scale that is just unimaginable. There's this famous essay written, half a century ago, called I, Pencil, in which the author asks, like, how many people does it take to produce one pencil? And the answer isn't one or two or a dozen, but more like millions. You need huge economies of skills, like the mines, the extraction to get the resources, the factories, blah, blah, blah. It's a massive undertaking, and that is true for all goods and services in our economy. So we're fundamentally dependent on each other. Now, AI only accelerates that. Like, what is AI? Well, it's the sum of all human knowledge, right? It's everything on the internet. It's all the languages. It's all the scientific theories. It's everything we have produced together as a species, learning from one another. It's never the story of, dwarves standing on the shoulders of giants. No, it's always like dwarves standing on the shoulders of dwarves. Like we're a species of hobbits piling on one another.
Dwarfs all the way down.
We go higher and higher and higher. Now, who deserves all that wealth? If you look at it this way, it's pretty obvious that like no one person deserves, a much bigger share of the pie. Like, the whole idea that you would have like billionaires or like trillionaires is kind of weird. It's like, okay, sure, some people are more talented than others. I get that. Like, I think Jeff Bezos is a pretty smart guy. I think Elon Musk is quite brilliant in many respects, also a total idiot in other respects. But sure. There are differences between people, but is it really like orders and orders of magnitude? Obviously not. So I think this recognition leads you to the conclusion that, hey, everyone deserves a share of that bounty. As AI starts producing more and more wealth, maybe we should all become shareholders in that wealth, right? And maybe that's what the future of the world should look like, is that everyone that we include in our moral circle deserves, a shareholder agreement, like a contract. And that is something that will keep producing dividends. And that will then be your universal basic income. So that's the very long and philosophical answer to what I think we could do. And in a way, already should have done. Because this theory of wealth creation is obviously a very different theory of, the current neoliberal capitalist theory of, who produces the wealth.
What am I to make of the somewhat surreal reality of the debate about at UBI right now, that it's coming from both social democrats like yourself and from the autocrats that are building the technology that could displace our labor and our jobs? Like, is that, do you guys both, when you say UBI and Musk says UBI, do you mean the same thing?
That's a good question. Like, I think where we are aligned is that I really dislike the paternalistic tendencies of the modern welfare state. Like, this is something that keeps coming back among social democrats, is that, a lot of us like to think that we know what's best. And the great thing about money is obviously that you can decide for yourself what to do with it. And I believe that, in that sense, I am a libertarian. I believe that the real experts on people's lives are people themselves. And that very often, if you want to solve poverty, yeah, poverty is a lack of cash. So give people money, then they're not poor anymore. And I think we should not judge them then on how they spend it. I think that's the fundamental Hayekian insight, Friedrich Hayek, the philosopher, who said like the system as a whole always has much more knowledge than the one centralized planner. So in that sense, I'm quite libertarian, and I don't like these paternalistic instincts. But yeah, I think we should be very distrustful of people like Altman and especially Musk when they're like, oh yeah, you'll get a UBI. Because there's one really important thing to add here. If you're a Luddite and you're like, I don't know, say you're a plumber or something, or no, better example, you're a coder in Silicon Valley and your job is suddenly gone. And you were making quite some money. You were living in San Francisco, which is one of the most expensive cities in the world. And then Musk says, don't worry, here's a UBI.
You're going to get $15,000 a year. Yeah.
Yeah, you couldn't live in San Francisco anymore. And so in that sense, like Dylan Matthews is one of the best authors on UBI. He's once written a piece that said UBI as a solution for technological job displacement is both too ambitious and not ambitious enough. Like it's a huge ambitious social policy, but for the specific groups that first suffer the consequences, it's not nearly enough.
I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on the politics of the moment we're in right now. We're a social democratic state. We are simultaneously pushing AI adoption on our citizens, right? Like we're getting in on the bandwagon of AI in a big way, as every Western economy is. But we also have a reasonable welfare state, and you could imagine this being the perfect moment for a conversation about UBI, right? But I would say it's not even in the political discourse, right? It's on the edges of it, really. But then you have an American context where you have the rise of a alignment between technology and authoritarianism in the US. I see that dystopian potential of narratives around UBI or job loss or as potentially having more purchase at the moment, frankly. And
yeah,
I don't quite know I'm getting at that, but I think there's two very different paths for how this could play out. And I'm pretty worried about the tech authoritarian version of that now.
Oh, yeah. Look, you describe me as a hopeful, optimistic historian. I also like to see myself as a realistic guy. And I'm deeply worried about what's going on. I'm pretty terrified even, especially about the situation in the United States, where indeed on the one hand, you have a small group of people developing this insanely powerful technology. And on the other hand, you have democracy utterly breaking down. Again, what could possibly go wrong in a situation like that?
In the same country, in the same political moment.
Exactly. So that's why I'm really banking on a massive expansion of a bipartisan neo-temperance movement, because that gives me a sliver of hope here, is that this is one of those few bipartisan things. Like both conservatives and progressives really hate it when they see their kids, being completely addicted to their phones. They really hate it that they themselves are often totally addicted to their phones. If you ask them, like, what do you think about your kid having an AI companion? Everyone is horrified. Like everyone's like, no, of course not. They should make real friends in real life. It's in school, etc. Like so many people from the left to the right are walking around with this feeling like this is happening too quickly. We're not in control. And social media and the smartphone are like tiny technologies compared to what's being developed now, or in a way, what has already been developed. As I said, I think that what we have right now, Claude, ChatGPT, I think these are already incredibly powerful technologies, and we still don't know yet what even the currently existing technologies will do to societies a decade or 2 decades from now. So, long story short, this is a moment for people to mobilize, to say like, enough is enough. Like we want to take a deep breath and have a proper discussion on, do we actually want this? Doesn't necessarily mean that we, will always ban it, that it will be concluded in some big prohibition moment when we ban AI like we banned alcohol. But yeah, we want to take back control.
I mean, that's a nice way to come back to where we started, in a sense that one challenge is that both the people building these technologies and potentially the neo-temperance movement, if that's what's emerging, both see themselves as moral actors or driven by moral ambition. They think what they're doing is good.
So I look at it a little bit differently. There's this famous quote from Oppenheimer, who was asked to reflect back on the development of the atomic bomb. And what's the exact quote? He was like, if something is so sweet, right? You kind of can't resist it because it's just too cool, right? You want to see the big boom. I think that is fundamentally what is driving most of these people working on this technology. It's just too awesome, man. It's like
they're entranced by the potential.
What if it actually works? I mean, wouldn't that be cool?
I mean, Musk has said as much, that even if this destroys humanity, at least he'll be there to see it, which is a remarkable thing to hear with the wealthiest person
and I think
on the planet.
It's also important to, like, for us normies, to understand how weird and strange the worldview of many of these people is. Like, someone like Elon Musk, I think there's a decent chance that he sees himself as a player in a simulation, that he thinks we're actually in a computer simulation where he's one of the few real players. And that's just the game that they're in. Or someone like Peter Thiel, who was recently asked in an interview with Ross Douthat of the New York Times, like, hey, do you want humanity to survive?
You would prefer the human race to endure, right? You're hesitating.
Yeah, well,
yes?
I don't know. I would.
This is a long hesitation. This is a long hesitation.
There's so many questions implicit in
this. Should the
this.
human race survive?
Yes.
Okay.
But
that's the definition of an awkward pause.
Yeah. These people, they're not the normies, I would say, working on it. That does not necessarily make them evil or anything like that, but they have a very different worldview from the standard Canadian social democratic humanistic worldview. Let's put it like that.
As I said earlier, I generally see your writing and your work as optimistic and hopeful, and leaves me with a sense of purpose and determination to try and engage in those moral pursuits. And I'm left this in a slightly darker place, I have to say. However, I think I know which side of this debate we started on you're on, which is the moral pursuit maybe to ensure these technologies work for the betterment of humanity.
Shall I give you some hope at the end of this conversation?
I mean, I wouldn't turn it down.
Okay, so I've got two historical analogies for you that have given me a lot of hope. I spoke to you about the British Abolitionist movement. Now, that movement got started in a moment in British politics that was really, really depressing. British society was decaying. At the time, 1 in 5 women in London had been forced into prostitution. There was horrible abuse of animals in the streets. There was an extraordinary amount of alcoholism among politicians who were extremely greedy and selfish. The king at the time, the later George IV, was an extraordinary prick, even by royal standards. Like, he was like the biggest selfish bastard that they had seen for quite some time in British politics. It was exactly in that moment that a small group of people came together, like William Wilberforce, like Thomas Clarkson, people with a certain measure of privilege, elites who started a countercultural revolution and said, you know what, enough is enough. We are going to make doing good fashionable once again. And we're not going to do that like, the woke people of today by preaching at others. No, we're going to do it by practicing what we preach, by actually having skin in the game, by doing the work, by spending our human capital, our financial capital, our cultural capital, by, entering the arena, as Theodore Roosevelt, the later progressive president, would say. And that's the second historical analogy I have for you. The Gilded Era, right? The Gilded Age, late 19th century, United States. Also an era of incredible corruption, inequality, the robber barons who were exploiting millions and millions of workers who were not getting a living wage. And then a counter movement against it, both bottom up and top down. So bottom up, you had the labor unions, you had people mobilizing, the NAACP that was founded, but then you also had a top down movement of elites coming together. And that was just an extreme moral reawakening, a societal revitalization. And just after the Gilded Age, right, you get the progressive era. So maybe that's our future. It's one of the scenarios. And this is not a prediction or anything like that. It's just I'm just saying, like, we are living through an extraordinary flexible moment in our history. Like, we are in the intermediate period between, the passing of one political order, which is neoliberalism, and something new is arising. And it could be, some really horrific form of AI accelerated authoritarianism. But it could also be, a reinvigorated form of social-democracy with some crazy utopian elements, as I've described in my book. We'll see. We'll see. We'll do.
Not we'll see. That's exactly right. And that's what that's the message I take from you, right? Is that we have agency in this, right? And your historical examples show that like small groups of people can make a big difference. And so, look, thanks for reminding us of that as we're in this moment of uncertainty and turmoil yet again. It's good to be reminded that we still matter as humans.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.